Hare Krishna, welcome back to our online Bhagavad Gita reading retreat lab. So, in the last session, we have covered almost 25 verses, and today we are going to complete this chapter. And we are left with only 5 verses, that is verse number 26 to verse number 30. So, here we are going to see the bewilderment of the living entity and knowledge of Krishna. So, without any delay, now let's move to the Vedas and we'll start reading from the chapter number 7, verse number 26. Translation. O Arjuna, as a supreme personality of Godhead, I know everything that has happened in the past, all that's happening in the present, and all things that are yet to come. I also know all living entities, but me, no one knows. Purport. Here, the question of personality and impersonality is clearly stated. If Krishna, the form of the supreme personality of Godhead, were Maya, material, as the impersonalists consider him to be, then, like the living entity, he would change body and forget everything about his past life. Anyone with a material body cannot remember his past life, nor can he foretell his future life, nor can he predict the outcome of his present life. Therefore, he cannot know what is happening in past, present, and future. Unless one is liberated from material contamination, he cannot know past, present, and future. Unlike the ordinary human being, Lord Krishna clearly says that he completely knows what happened in the past, what is happening in the present, and what will happen in the future. In the fourth chapter, we have seen that Lord Krishna remembers instructing Vivaswan, the sun god, millions of years ago. Krishna knows every living entity because he is situated in every living being's heart as a super soul. But despite his presence in every living entity as super soul and his presence as the supreme personality of Godhead, the less intelligent, even if able to realize the impersonal Brahman, cannot realize Sri Krishna as the supreme person. Certainly, the transcendental body of Sri Krishna is not perishable. He is just like the sun, and Maya is like a cloud. In the material world, we can see that there is a sun and that there are clouds and different stars and planets. The clouds may cover all this in the sky temporarily, but this covering is only apparent to our limited reason. The sun, moon, and stars are not actually covered here. Similarly, Maya cannot cover the Supreme Lord. By his internal potency, he is not manifest to the less intelligent class of men. As it is stated in the third verse of this chapter, out of millions and millions of men, some try to become perfect in this human form of life. And out of thousands and thousands of such perfected men, hardly one can understand what Lord Krishna is. Even if one is perfected by realization of impersonal Brahman or localized Paramatma, he cannot possibly understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, without being in Krishna consciousness. Now we'll move to the next verse, that is the chapter number 7, verse number 27. Translation. O Varata, O conqueror of the four, all living entities are born into delusion, bewildered by dualities arising from desire and hate. Purport. The real constitutional position of the living entity is that of subordination to the Supreme Lord, who is pure knowledge. When one is deluded into separation from this pure knowledge, he becomes controlled by the illusory energy and cannot understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The illusory energy is manifested in the duality of desire and hate. Due to desire and hate, the ignorant person wants to become one with the Supreme Lord and envies Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Pure devotees who are not deluded or contaminated by desire and hate can understand that Lord Sri Krishna appears by his internal potencies, but those who are deluded by duality and nescience think that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is created by material energy. This is their misfortune. Such deluded persons symptomatically dwell in dualities of dishonor and honor, misery and happiness, woman and man, good and bad, pleasure and pain, etc. Thinking, this is my wife, this is my house, I am the master of this house, I am the husband of this wife. These are the dualities of delusion. Those who are so deluded by duality are completely foolish, therefore cannot understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now we will move to the next verse, chapter number 7, verse number 28. Translation. Persons who have acted piously in previous life and in this life, and those sinful actions are completely eradicated, are freed from the dualities of delusion, and they engage themselves in my service with determination. Purport. Those eligible for elevation to the transcendental position are mentioned in this verse. For those who are sinful, atheistic, foolish, and deceitful, it is very difficult to transcend the duality of desire and hate. Only those who have passed their lives in practicing the regulative principles of religion, who have acted piously, and who have conquered sinful reactions can accept devotional service and gradually rise to the pure knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then gradually they can meditate in trance on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is the process of being situated on the spiritual platform. This elevation is possible in Krishna consciousness in the association of pure devotees, or in the association of great devotees, one can be delivered from delusion. It is stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto number 5, 5.5.2, that if one actually wants to be liberated, he must render service to the devotees. Mahasevam Varam Ahus Yunisve. But one who associates with materialistic people is on the path leading to the darkest region of existence. Samadvaram Yoshitam Sangi Sangam. All the devotees of the Lord traverse this path just to recover the conditioned souls from their delusion. The impersonalists do not know that forgetting their constitutional position as subordinate to the Supreme Lord is the greatest violation of God's law. Unless one is reinstated in his own constitutional position, it is not possible to understand the Supreme Personality or to be fully engaged in his transcendental loving service with determination. Now we will move to the next verse, chapter number 7, verse number 29. Translation. Intelligent persons who are endeavoring for liberation from old age and death take refuge in me in devotional service. They are actually Brahman because they entirely know everything about transcendental activities. Purport. Birth, death, old age, and diseases affect this material body, but not the spiritual body. There is no birth, death, old age, and disease for the spiritual body. So, one who attains the spiritual body becomes one of the associates of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and engages in eternal devotional service, is merely liberated. Aham Brahmasmi, I am spirit. It is said that one should understand that he is Brahman, spirit soul. This Brahman conception of life is also in devotional service, as described in this verse. The pure devotees are transcendentally situated on the Brahman platform, and they know everything about transcendental activities. Four kinds of impure devotees who engage themselves in the transcendental service of the Lord achieve their respective goals. And by the grace of the Supreme Lord, when they are fully Krishna conscious, they actually enjoy spiritual association with the Supreme Lord. But Those who are worshippers of demigods never reach the Supreme Lord in his supreme planet. Even the less intelligent Brahman realized person cannot reach the supreme planet of Krishna known as Golak Vrindavan. Only persons who perform activities in Krishna consciousness, Mam Ashritya, are actually entitled to be called Brahman because they are actually endeavoring to reach the Krishna planet. Such persons have no misgivings about Krishna and thus they are actually Brahman. Those who are engaged in worshipping in the form of Aksha of the Lord or who are engaged in meditation on the Lord simply for liberation from material bondage also know by the grace of the Lord the purpose of Brahman, Adibhuta, etc., as explained by the Lord in the next chapter. Now we'll move to the next verse, chapter number 7, verse number 30, translation. Those in full consciousness of me who know me, the Supreme Lord, to be the governing principle of the natural manifestation of the demigod and of all methods of sacrifice can understand and know me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, even at the time of death. Purport. Persons acting in Krishna consciousness are never deviated from the path of entirely understanding the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the transcendental association of Krishna consciousness, one can understand how the Supreme Lord is the governing principle of the material manifestation and even of the demigod. Gradually, by such transcendental association, one becomes convinced of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And at the time of death, such a Krishna conscious person can never forget Krishna. Naturally, he is thus promoted to the planet of the Supreme Lord, Golak Vrindavan. This seventh chapter particularly explains how one can become a fully Krishna conscious person. The beginning of Krishna consciousness is association of persons who are Krishna conscious. Such association is spiritual and puts one directly in touch with the Supreme Lord. And by his grace, one can understand Krishna to be the Supreme Personality of Godhead. At the same time, one can really understand the constitutional position of the living entity and how the living entity forgets Krishna and becomes entangled in material activities. By gradual development of Krishna consciousness in good association, the living entity can understand that due to forgetfulness of Krishna, he has become conditioned by the laws of natural nature. He can also understand that this human form of life is an opportunity to regain Krishna consciousness and that it should be fully utilized to attain the causeless mercy of the Supreme Lord. Many subjects have been discussed in this chapter: the man in distress, the inquisitive man, the man in want of material necessities, knowledge of Brahman, knowledge of Paramatma, liberation from birth, death, and diseases, and worship of the Supreme Lord. However, he who is actually elevated in Krishna consciousness doesn't care for the different sources. He simply directly engages himself in activities of Krishna consciousness and thereby actually attains the constitutional position as an eternal servitor of Lord Krishna. In such a situation, he takes pleasure in hearing and glorifying the Supreme Lord in pure devotional service. He is convinced that by his doing so, all his objectives will be fulfilled. This determined faith is called Dridhavrata, and it is the beginning of Bhakti Yoga or transcendental loving service. That is the verdict of all scriptures. This seventh chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is the substance of that conviction. Thus, and the Bhaktivedanta purports to the seventh chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita in the matter of knowledge of the Absolute. So with this, we completed the chapter number 7, that is knowledge of the Absolute. Now we'll just quickly summarize this particular section today. Today we have seen in this verse number 26 to verse number 30, just to summarize, Krishna knows all and is thus different from all these fullness living entities that are born into delusion and are bewildered by dualities arising from desire and fate. So the pious persons who are actually freed from all these kind of dualities arising from delusion, they prefer to engage themselves in devotional service and with determination and they attain the liberation. They have knowledge of Krishna is Adibhuta, Adidaiva, and Adijagya. So with this, we completed this chapter, and from next session, we will start with the chapter number 8. Hare Krishna.